This film begins with a guy named Lance. So in his life, he used to be a tough guy in a simple neighborhood, doing bad stuff like being in a gang and taking out people for money. But one day, his so-called friend double-crossed him and the cops got him. Because of that, he spent 15 years in jail. When Lance got out of prison, he didn't want much to do with other people. He did odd jobs, like welding, just to get by. Even though he was free, he always felt like something bad might happen, so he carried a gun around all the time. And to fight off the loneliness, he played music in his room. One day, Lance met his new neighbor, a young girl named Anna. She worked as a singer in a bar in town. When she saw her new neighbor, Lance, who was usually pretty distant, she said hi. Meanwhile, in another part of town, we meet a guy named Gregor. He's not a good guy cause he's a gang leader and sells drugs. To hide his illegal activities, Gregor got married to a young woman named Adelina, and they opened a bakery together. After serving their bakery customers, Gregor asked his wife if he could step out for a while. Adelina never suspected what her husband was up to. Even though they have a big age gap, she really loves him. Turns out, Gregor was meeting an old man to buy drugs at that time. The old man gave Gregor several types of drugs, and they hid them under their car to avoid suspicion. After that, Gregor and his crew left the place. The next day, Gregor and his crew got a call from one of their gangster buddies. He wanted to meet them urgently, and Gregor seemed really scared of the guy, so he couldn't say no. Turns out, Gregor was meeting a guy named Vladimir, also known as Vladimir. At first, Vladimir asked about Adelina, but then he got mad at the Aryan Brotherhood for betraying their business. He told Gregor to solve this problem by wiping out the whole group. At that time, Gregor didn't want any trouble with those guys because he had no issues with them. But Vladimir warned him that if the Aryans caught him, they'd catch Gregor too. Vladimir also showed him some pictures of Lance, who had just been released from prison. Lance had some history with Vladimir that landed him in jail. If Lance followed their orders, Vladimir promised not to bother him anymore. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Lance couldn't find peace because of his troubled past and the tattoos that reminded him of it. He decided to get rid of one of the tattoos and went to a tattoo artist for help. But when the artist saw the symbol on Lance's chest, she refused to do it. Feeling tormented, Lance went to a nearby bar to calm his nerves. There, he ran into Anna, who was singing. There, Anna noticed him and came down to say hi, but Lance just wanted to be left alone, which annoyed her. She wondered if he was always so grumpy or just with her. Later, Lance returned to his place, and Gregor and his crew were waiting for him there. Gregor told Lance what he wanted, to take out the Aryan Brotherhood in exchange for a new passport and money so that Lance could start fresh and live in peace. At first, Lance said no to Gregor's request because he wanted to leave that life behind, but Gregor gave him some time to think it over. As Gregor and his crew were leaving, they bumped into Anna, who had just come home from work. This got them both curious about the connection between Lance and Anna. After they left, Lance decided to talk to Anna. He was drawn to her voice and suggested that she should find a place that appreciated her talent more. Anna, however, said she didn't have any other hopes besides working at the bar. Then, they each went back to their rooms. There, Gregor's offer had left Lance confused and unable to think straight. After a while, Lance called Gregor and turned down the offer because he didn't want to be part of any more murders. But Gregor refused to accept that decision, insisting that once a murderer, always a murderer, and that Lance had to take care of the Aryan group. What Gregor didn't realize was that his wife overheard the conversation. The next day, Lance headed over to the Aryan headquarters to avoid raising suspicions. He showed them a tattoo with their Brotherhood symbol and was taken to meet their leader, Thomas. Shortly after, Thomas began asking Lance some questions, but before he could answer, Thomas seemed to get suspicious of him. Out of nowhere, Lance attacked and killed Thomas. Afterward, he returned to his car and called Gregor, asking where he kept the promised passport and money. It turns out Gregor had hidden these things in the ventilation system of Lance's boarding house. After knowing that, Lance went back, checked the ventilation, and found the passport. With it, he planned to move to another country and start a fresh life. In the middle of the night, Lance did something that left him feeling confused. He drank a lot of beer and then heated up an iron. He intended to use it to get rid of his tattoos, but soon after, he passed out. When he woke up, he decided to pack his things. As he was about to leave, Lance noticed Anna had fainted on the stairs. He felt sorry for her and took her to her room. Seeing Anna struggling on her own in the city made Lance sympathize with her, and he began to think of her like a daughter. He asked her what she was doing in the city, thinking she deserved better. Anna, however, asked Lance not to treat her like a father would treat his child because her own father had brought nightmares into her life. Before leaving for good, Lance left a box of vinyl records at Anna's boarding house door. Shortly after, Anna woke up, found the box, and played the music in her room. She really liked it and wanted to thank Lance and meet him, but he had already left. So she left a message on the wall, asking Lance to meet her at the bar that night. Somewhere else, Gregor and his crew were having a serious talk about their business. Soon after, Vladimir showed up. When Vladimir saw the urgent situation, his crew quickly left the place. It turned out that Vladimir had come to inform Gregor that a 10-year-old kid had witnessed what Lance had done. Right now, the police were keeping an eye on the child, and there was a chance that Lance might get arrested again. To erase any evidence and ties to the murder, Vladimir asked Gregor to take care of Lance quietly, without leaving any clues behind. In that moment, Gregor was stuck in a tough spot because of this request, but he had no other option. Eventually, he instructed his crew to eliminate Lance right away. He also warned them not to do anything that would make Anna suspicious. Soon after, Gregor's men set out to handle Lance. Along the way, they felt conflicted because they had to betray someone who had been working for their boss. When they reached Lance's place, they discovered a note on the wall. They also searched the place but couldn't find Lance. So, they split into two teams. One team would wait for Lance at his boarding house, while the other team would head to the bar to find Lance and Anna. Shortly after, Lance returned to his boarding house and was suddenly ambushed by these individuals. At that moment, Lance was nearly beaten and couldn't defend himself against these two attackers. However, when he spotted a letter left by Anna, he understood that Anna was in danger. So he mustered the courage to fight back and turned the situation around, defeating Gregor's two men. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Gregor's other henchmen began to grow suspicious because they hadn't received any updates from their colleagues. Eventually, two of them split up. One went to the bar to keep an eye on Anna, while the other returned to Lance's boarding house to investigate the situation. When he arrived there, he found his two comrades dead and promptly reported this to Gregor. Gregor was in a state of panic and intended to follow them. Before leaving, he sought his wife's permission and mentioned that he'd be back soon. However, from their conversation, it was evident that Gregor had little hope of returning home, and his wife was starting to suspect his activities. Soon after, Lance finally arrived at the bar. Seeing Lance at the bar, Anna started singing her favorite song. There, he also recognized Gregor's henchman, whom we'll call Joseph. Realizing that Joseph was targeting him, Lance offered him a chance to leave the place immediately. However, Joseph decided to stay. A little while later, Lance managed to lure Joseph away from that spot and suddenly launched an attack on him. Meanwhile, Anna grew suspicious of the two men and promptly halted her performance. Then she decided to investigate what was going on with these two. Witnessing Lance brutally defeat Joseph left Anna in shock, and she urged Lance to stay away from her. At that time, Lance tried to explain that Joseph posed a threat to Anna. He instructed Anna to quickly find shelter and call the police. While Anna was trying to contact the police, she was unexpectedly struck from behind. After successfully apprehending Anna, the man we'll call Peter immediately informed Gregor. Then, Peter informed Gregor that Anna now knew everything about their activities. Feeling that the situation was spiraling out of control and fearing that Anna might become a liability, Gregor instructed Peter to eliminate her. This was not only to remove any evidence, but also because if Lance found out that Anna was still alive and in their custody, Lance would not hesitate to attack them to protect her. Peter, who was feeling torn at the time, found himself with no other choice but to obey his boss's orders. Before carrying out the act on Anna, he decided to call Lance to inform him about his intentions. All of a sudden, a gunshot rang out, leaving Lance in a state of shock, and he became unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Gregor arrived to collect Peter and console him after the incident. Shortly after, Lance called Gregor and arranged for a meeting behind the lumber factory. In no time, Gregor and his crew reached the lumber factory. When they saw Gregor's men getting out of their car, Lance sprang into action. At that moment, Gregor assumed that his men had successfully taken down Lance. Then he emerged from his hiding spot to inspect Lance's body, but to his astonishment, the bodies were actually those of his own men. Suddenly, Gregor found himself under attack. In another place, Vladimir becomes increasingly anxious because he hasn't received any updates from Gregor. To erase any evidence of Gregor's disappearance, he ultimately tracks down Adelina and shoots her. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Anna, who was believed to be dead, turns out to be alive. She manages to free herself and returns to her boarding house. When she spots Lance's music player there, which had been annoying her, she angrily slams it. To her surprise, the box not only contains tapes, but also tens of thousands of dollars in cash and letters. It seems like Lance is offering Anna a chance for a better life than what she has now. In the end, Gregor and Lance are shown nearly on the brink of death from their intense fight. In this dire situation, Gregor still manages to speak, which only fuels Lance's disgust, leading Lance to silence him with a gunshot. After this incident, it remains uncertain whether Lance survived and achieved the peaceful life he had dreamt of, or if he met a tragic fate like Gregor. And the film ends. The moral lesson from film is never leave cash and letters in a box with your music player, or you might accidentally change someone's life forever.